Hello, and thanks for joining me today. My name is Tom LaForce, and I've got a short video for you about one of my favorite meeting facilitation tools. It's the tool that I call multi-voting, and maybe others have called it multiple voting. Anyway, the video is called Quick Sort, and I want to teach you how to use this tool in the meetings that you lead. Before we go any further, though, just a quick introduction about myself. I have a meeting facilitation and consulting business. I'm located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hopefully I don't say you betcha, but I probably do sound like I've been here a good long time because I have been. I'm a big fan of learning. I'm always searching the internet for new ideas and watching how-to videos like this one. And when I get a chance in the summertime, I like to eat what I grow and grow what I eat. And so I'm a big vegetable gardener. Love growing my own stuff. Okay, so enough about me. Here's the tool. So let's imagine you're part of a marketing committee and you have a website that's not getting enough traffic, and somebody gives you all the marching orders to get more people showing up to our website. And you do some research, you collect some lists, maybe you do a big brainstorming session, but at the end of the day, you end up with this big honking list of ideas. And there's probably good ideas on here and some that aren't so good. But the question that really ends up needing to be answered is, well, so now what? What do we do with all this stuff? We've got way too much stuff than we can handle at once. How do we sort it down? And that's where multiple voting or multi-voting comes into play. Now, I've asked carpenters this question before. Hey, what's your favorite tool? And they tell me usually I guess that maybe it's not the favorite tool, but which tool do you use more than any? And they usually tell me it's a tape measure. That's what they use more than any other tool in their toolbox. And when people have asked me the same question as a meeting leader, meeting facilitator, what's your favorite tool? I say it's multi-voting. Love this tool. So let me show you how it works. We're going to sort of run through from step to step. And the process always starts with just a simple organization. Especially if it's following a brainstorming session, you've got a whiteboard or flip charts just full of ideas, and they're a big mess. And that somehow, you need to get them organized. And I like to put them in columns or a long list, and I like to give each item a letter. And so it ends up looking more like this. Now, the reason I like to do letters is because later on we can refer to those letters easily as we're doing some voting, and we can tell people, okay, so it looks like E and M and O are sort of our top choices. We don't have to spend so much time going through long descriptions, especially if they are longer than what I might have here. So the first thing is to simply organize the list, clean it up, give each item a letter. Now, the second thing, this gets a little tricky. You've got to find some selection criteria. So multiple voting, the overall idea is we're going to take a group, and each group member is going to get to vote on more than one thing. And so we're asking them to pick out sort of like, well, what's best? But the question is well, what makes one item better than another? So think about it this way. Imagine you're an apple grower, and you've got, just bushels and bushels of apples sitting there, and you want to start sorting them out. And your goal is to get the really prime apples in one place so you can sell them as straight up eating apples, and you could probably sell them for a higher price. And then there's going to be apples that just don't make the cut at all. I mean, they're just kind of rotten and they're going to end up in a compost heap. Some apples are going to maybe made into cider, but somehow if you're the person who's charged with sorting these things, you're going to need some way to sort them out. And maybe there's going to be some standards around size, shape, how ripe are they? Are there any big ugly spots on them or not? So when you're doing multiple voting with a group and you're working with ideas, you need the same kind of criteria. So all these ideas come flying at you and you're saying to the group, okay, group, I don't want you just to randomly pick out which ones are best based on your own individual preferences. I wanna like connect your brains into one big computer and have you all sort of think about these things in the same way. Now there are a lot of things that could end up being selection criteria, but typically, these four that I have up here are pretty common. The first one is, okay, which idea is going to actually have the biggest impact on what you're trying to do? So if in our case we have our goal is to get more traffic to the site, which items do we think would do that? Which items are going to get more traffic and which items are going to get less traffic? The second one that a lot of times teams have to be thinking about is, to what degree do we have control over implementing these ideas, building them, developing them, and ultimately implementing them? And people generally believe that items that they have more control over are better and more favorable than those that they don't. That would have to go through 5 other committees or up the food chain. They want things that they have more control over. There's usually a timing criteria as well. I mean, if you've got a lot of time and you might have a high impact thing, that's fine. If it's going to take a long time to develop it. But what if you don't? What if time is sort of the essence and you're kind of in an emergency mode? Clearly, those that you could build and implement quicker would be better than those that take longer time. And then the last one, and I'd be careful with this, people almost always say cheaper is better. There's some sort of cost thing. You might even change the word cost to value, because I do think you could have a relatively expensive idea, but the return is expected to be so high that it really has a high value. So you might just throw these out to the group and suggest them. I would hopefully try to keep it to maybe about 3, maybe not all 4. And if the group starts, if you ask the group and they start chiming in what they think, you might have to do a discussion around this and keep moving them towards 2 or 3 of the most important criteria and get them to decide on that first. All right. Now you've got the criteria. You have a way of deciding which is better than another because you've described that. The next thing we go on to is to tell the group, look, we're going to vote, but before we start voting, we got to think through which methods are we going to use. And there really are 3 possible methods. So the first is to simply say to the group, okay, I'm going to work my way through the list, and if this is one of your top ideas, I want you to raise your hand. Now, the beauty of that is it's pretty fast. I just say, okay, we've got item A. How many of you thought this was one of your top vote getters? And they got their hands up. I count them out. I find that there's 8. I put a little 8 behind that item, and I go to the next item. It's fast. The drawback is it's also pretty visible, and people might not feel comfortable raising their hand. The second way is just to have the items all scattered up on the wall on something that you can write on. So it might be flip charts, several flip charts, or just flip chart paper stuck to the wall, or a big whiteboard. And you tell people, hey, step up here, grab a marker, and put some tick marks behind those that you think are most, do the best job of meeting the selection criteria. Now, the beauty of that one is, it's fun. People like it. It seems very participative. They're up there sort of strong-arming and influencing one another at the board, which I think is fine because ultimately we're trying to build some consensus. And if that consensus happens through discussion, I'm okay with that. But again, like the hands up, it's very visible. And if people feel, unduly influenced by their coworkers, or maybe the boss is there voting for something that you didn't want to vote for, there's going to be a lot of pressure for you to change your vote because you figure, he or she is looking at how you vote and you kind of want to be aligned with the boss. And if that's the case, if it's really controversial, maybe it's politically sort of dangerous, then you might want to go to the third method, which is voting by some version of secret ballot. People could just write these things on a piece of paper and turn them in. Or you could just stop the meeting after explaining the voting and go away and send out an anonymous survey. That's what SurveyMonkey works great for. And you tell them you're going to work through the voting process that way. Now, you get these 3 methods, but there's also another question that you really need to answer is, well, how many votes do people get? And the idea is that they need to have enough votes in the group to start making the winners and losers, pretty clear. So we had a long list. We had like 24 items, I think, 24 items on the list. And if you don't have very many people in the room, you might need to give them a lot of votes, maybe 7 to 10 votes each. If you have a shorter list, maybe 8, 9, 10, and you've got a pretty big group in the room, let's say 10 or more, maybe you just give them 2 or 3 votes, because that's 30 votes that are going to be cast over 8 or 9 items. Chances are some are going to emerge as more popular than the other. It doesn't really matter what the exact number is, but again, the goal is to have enough votes that will be cast that some become the clear winners, or demonstrate clearly that there's more interest within the group on certain items than on others. If people argue with you about what that should be, your best bet is to figure out what it is beforehand and just let them know through your instructions this is the way it's going to be. And don't even make it sound like there's a choice, because then you'll end up with a big discussion about that, and you don't really want that. So then they vote. If you're in the meeting, they're up there raising their hand, they're doing secret ballots, they're making their tick marks on the wall, or you've sent them off and now they're sort of in an offline setting, using, well, actually they're offline from the meeting, but they're probably using some online survey tool, and they do their votes. And the votes start being cast across the item. So if this was me doing a tally of hands that are raised, or individuals coming to the wall and making their own marks, it might start looking something like this. And over a certain amount of time, we get through the whole group, and pretty soon all the votes are cast, and you're going to have these distributions starting to be created. Which brings us to step 5. Now it's time to tally them up, and that's a pretty easy process of simply counting. And so I convert my little tick marks, or my paper ballots, or my online voting into something that just shows the numbers. And so you can see here, we've got 4 and 5 and 2, and some don't have any because they didn't get any votes. Once you've got the numbers, now it's time to decide. So it says use the vote to inform the decision. That's slightly different than use the vote to make the decision, because I don't want to imply that the highest number of votes are automatically the winners, and I don't want to say that the ones that don't get very many votes are automatically out of the running. But more times than not, this is a nice representation of sort of what the consensus view is, and high numbers should move forward. So you might look at something like this. I've highlighted the 3 that got the most votes in red. So we've got paid search ads were 5, offer guest post opportunities at 5, and doing more webinars got 9 votes. I would say those 3 were sticking out pretty high, although there were 2 more right behind it with 4 votes, the display ads and W, which was doing more press releases. So you use the information at this point, you'd start asking questions like, well, how much capacity do we have to take on some of these kinds of actions and strategies? How many do we really want to do? If somebody who maybe had something less, let's say item Y down there where it says publish an ebook, and, there are 2 people, and one of those people want to make a really, really strong and passionate plea for it, maybe you end up throwing that into the mix. If you end up with 4 or 5 or 6 and you think that's too many to actually deal with, you've still made progress. You went from 24 items down to 4 or 5 in a very short time. I mean, you can do all this sorting in maybe 15 minutes. And that's a huge upside, because now if we've got it down to 4 or 5, we can maybe spin another vote, or we could start having some sort of conversation and use another tool or another discussion process. For instance, I use something called structured discussion, and maybe I'll make another video about that someday. But the point is you don't want to be having a group of 8 or 9 people talking about 24 items. It's just too random, and it just, I mean, you could spend hours and not feeling like you're making any progress. With this tool, you quickly decide, here are the ones that sort of seem like they're the most promising and those that aren't, and then you're finished. You decide what to do, and on you move. You've just successfully used multiple voting to sort a long list to something that's more manageable. So thanks for watching. I'm here to help. I can do on-site workshops on tools like this or meeting facilitation in general. If you as an individual want some coaching on how to be a better facilitator, I can do that. I plan on making more videos like this one, so check them out. You can stop by my website to find what's the sort of the latest and the greatest. And I'll be sure to include a few links in the information below the video as well.